From the studios at Suprising Law and Mediation, this is the Splitting Smart podcast. Today's special guest is my longtime friend of over 20 years, Denny Brewer. Denny is a powerhouse in the world of family law and faith-based advocacy, and he's been practicing law since 1980, and he's a board-certified family law specialist. Denny is also the General Counsel and Executive Pastor at Fellowship Church in Grapevine, Texas, and of C3 Global, where he's dedicated nearly 18 years to serving churches, clergy, and religious organizations nationwide. And if that's not enough, Denny's a newly published author, having co-authored the book Back to Court, a complete guide to child custody litigation, which provides practical insights for navigating child custody cases after divorce. We're fortunate to have him here today to share his unique perspectives on how faith and family law intersect. Part 2. Domestic violence is an equal opportunity evil. It happens in the church. It happens outside of the church. We want to handle this issue of domestic violence very honestly and frankly. And so it happens from time to time where there'll be a couple in the church, and one of them, I'm going to call it the she. It happens with men too. That there's another whole topic on that. I could talk all day on men suffering from domestic violence. But let's say it's the woman, and there's some things going on in the background, and it's become intolerable. She's beaten and abused, or maybe not even beaten. Okay, you don't have to be beaten to be a victim of domestic violence, but the control and abuse has gotten to such a fever pitch. It's not tolerable. I'd tell you shouldn't tolerate it for a second anyway, by the way. And she goes and she's going to leave the marriage. And she tells him, I'm leaving. She may not even have a restraining order yet. We've seen, you've seen it, I've seen it, where a perpetrator, if you will, of domestic violence will often use the church or try to use the church as a weapon and weaponize the church against that spouse because they don't want to have the marriage fall apart. And what we do know with many years of handling domestic violence cases and studying it, there's a lot behind this, the psychology of it. We do know that the biggest issue in domestic violence tends to be the fear of losing control by the person who is perpetrating the harm. And so the church is fertile ground for trying to get control over the spouse back. And so that lady, all of a sudden, maybe she doesn't goes and gets a restraining order, but she doesn't tell anybody in the church. She's not particularly comfortable, or she's told a few close people in her inner circle, but she said, please do not share that.
Right.
And that guy goes to the pastors or the divorce recovery people or the married couples ministry pastor, right? And says, my wife has threatened to leave me and take our children. Would you be willing to do some counseling? And would you call her and ask her to attend? So here's the hypo. And this is a common reality. So that pastor, not knowing what's going on, of course, calls her up and says, hey, would you be willing to come in? You guys have been married a long time. And she said, no. And then the husband asks again, just ask her one more time. I'll come into counseling with you. And maybe he goes a time or two. And so he's willing to counsel, and they call again, and she says no. And now it starts getting uncomfortable because what does it look like in her mind?
Yeah.
Okay. So let's talk about if a pastor knows there's domestic violence or even allegations of it, should they be trying to convene the parties together? What do you think?
No. Can I give you an example of a case that I was a very young lawyer? This happened many years ago. Had a young man come see me. Seemed like he had it together. Said his wife had filed suit for divorce. That he went to my church. This was another church I was attending, not Fellowship Church. This was, again, many, many years ago. And he told me that she wanted a divorce. He wanted to reconcile. Told me that I've made some mistakes. I've been the bad guy, but I'm a Christian now. I've changed my ways. and I don't want a divorce. I want to save my marriage. Would you represent me? And he tells me that he was referred to me by someone that was in the church. So tell him I'll take the case. Well, what I quickly learned from his wife's lawyer, and who wanted me to speak directly to the wife, which doesn't happen very often, outside of the presence of the lawyer. I found out that this young lady was very frightened of my client, had been subject to a lot of violence in the marriage, and that he had actually followed her to the church and was basically stalking her at church. Now, if you were on the outside, if you were one of the pastors there, you would look and you might meet with this guy and think, well, he's coming to church. He wants to save his marriage, and I need to step in and try to encourage that. Well, fast forward several weeks, he doesn't do what I tell him to do. I withdrew as his lawyer, which you don't do that often, but I did in this case. To make a very long story short, about 4 weeks later, I get a call. As it turns out, he had gone to his wife's apartment. She had a little 3-year-old daughter from a previous marriage. She opens the door up. He shoots her point blank, murders her in the presence of her little 3-year-old daughter. Now, that's a situation where if you had told me that was possible, I would have said, no way under the sun. But the point, Kelly, is that you never know. So you better be very careful when you step into that, because very oftentimes, even the lawyer, you and I, in the role of that party's lawyer, we don't know everything that's gone on. You don't know how severe. You got to take, if the question's raised, you got to take it seriously. But there are many times where you hear, yeah, I'm afraid of my husband, or I'm afraid of my wife even, and they may do this or that, and usually nothing happens. And if you're not careful, you can dismiss it and go, yeah, that's what everybody says. But there are those exceptions, and those exceptions, and in this case, a wonderful young lady lost her life in front of her little daughter.
And it's tragic, and it does happen. This is important for pastors to understand, and for you to understand if you're listening to this and you've had some abuse happen in your marriage, and for your family to understand. Just because there's not a restraining order doesn't mean things aren't happening and that there's not a risk. For example, my girlfriend, past presiding judge, she tells the story. A couple comes in, wife's asking for a restraining order. She's not represented, not doing a great job of it by herself, but she's afraid and all the things. Well, kudos for her for being able to walk into a courtroom all by herself and ask for a restraining order. Husband has counsel. Wife isn't able to present the minimum thresholds required for a restraining order. It doesn't feel good to the judge, but she doesn't have the law behind her. So she denies the restraining order. Leave the courtroom. The next morning she comes to work and finds out that afternoon, similar to your situation, he went to the marital home and he killed the wife and the 3 children. What that does to a judge, and the attorneys as well, but to a judge, my girlfriend, she left work the minute she heard that news, and she went into a movie theater and watched 3 movies back to back all afternoon. And sat in the dark. She couldn't handle the guilt and the enormity of what happened, but she did her job right? So it's happening. So if our church leaders are understanding that there's so much more than meets the eye here on abuse and domestic violence, and you've got someone like your guy who, wants to go to the pastor and say, I'm attending church, can't you get her to come back and let's have a reasonable conversation? I would probably argue that the very first question that should be asked is not in a joint session, is to call her up and say, has there been abuse here? You don't have to tell me. And then she may not tell you. She may not tell you. But has there been abuse here? It's what we do the minute we have someone come into our office. It's what I do as a mediator when people are going to come in to talk about the idea of mediating, I'm going to talk to each spouse separately and say, has there been abuse here? I know you had an experience, and it speaks to this, and it's another nuance for our church leaders really to pay attention to here. They may tell you some, but you still may not know all of it. Can you talk a little bit about what happened in the barn, Denny?
My client, very wonderful, sweet lady, been married to a medical doctor for a number of years. There were children of the marriage. She had been through cancer, had surgery, chemotherapy, radiation. Husband found himself a girlfriend. We had taken depositions. We had looked under every rock. I knew all of the facts of the case, right, when we went in. And it was only in the middle of this trial that my female paralegal said, "Hey, I need to talk to you." She pulled me out in the hallway and she goes, "Let me tell you what our client just told me." It was a huge, shocking bit of evidence that my client had been so embarrassed to tell me. She finally felt comfortable enough to tell my female paralegal. Almost unbelievable what was revealed. This is what she just told me happened in the barn. I don't think I can say this on the air. Happened, but it was not good. It was terrible. And now I'll tell you the way I used that. While I had the good doctor on the stand, I was about ready to pass him, and I looked at him and I said, "I'll tell you what, why don't you just look over and tell the judge what happened in the barn?" Well, there was shock on his face, on his lawyer's face. He turned bright red, and that's frankly all I needed to say. Because again, we had looked under every rock. Everybody had had their deposition taken. The right question had never been asked of my client, where she had to reveal that. But the point there, Kelly, is that this was a client that, quite frankly, trusted me. With all of that trust, with all of the work that we did, all the questions we asked, all the discovery, there was still embarrassment, reluctance, even though she was the victim, to tell me what had happened. So what's the point of that story? That oftentimes you never know everything that goes on behind closed doors. You're just not going to know it. And if your lawyer doesn't know it, your trusted lawyer, then probably a lot of your trusted friends, and certainly your pastor likely doesn't know it, and your Bible class leader doesn't know it. So you just got to be careful about thinking you understand the dynamics of the situation, because you may not have a clue.
That's right. And I think that's such a good word to pastors and any kind of person in leadership in church and support people is you may never know. And quite frankly, in certain situations, it's not for you to know. It's not
Yeah.
for you to know,
Right.
which I think when we talk about biblical counseling, it's important. And you're going to get a sense when there's just deep resistance. Listen to that little, again, if you're not from the Christian faith, we'll call it the Holy Spirit. There's a little tap, tap, tap on the shoulder. Something's not right here. You better
Yeah.
listen to it. Encourage that person into honest to goodness therapy, because that's where it belongs on that
Mhm.
level. And it needs to be okay for that person not to take them at their word for it, right? No, again,
Right.
to your point, we're not saying that, marriage should be something that's just easily disposable. You made a commitment, let's get to it, right? But at the
Right.
same time, this is such a serious issue here. And if you're the person of faith and you feel like you can't talk to your pastor, be okay with that. There should not be shame in that idea. Please don't hold it here. Go to
Right.
somebody who's a professional where you can share it, because there are ramifications for holding that kind of information that eat you alive inside. Hey, friend, if you or someone you love has gone through some recent life challenges, or maybe you're in the middle of one right now, whether that be a challenge with your health or a relationship challenge, perhaps a marriage is ending, I want you to know I wrote a book for you and that loved one. And it's called Victim Is Not Your Name. In this book, I describe 6 victim habits that you and most other people tend to get into unknowingly. And these are the kinds of habits, which are just behavioral patterns, mindset patterns that keep you in a place that keeps you stuck and keeps you in a place of deterioration within the challenge that you're facing. I also provide you 6 key strategies for disrupting those victim habits and getting you out of that place and back to a place where you can start to remember and rediscover your true identity, who you were meant to be, who you were made to be, and your purpose in life. It's not in being a victim. Victim is Not Your Name is available to you right now on Amazon. Grab yourself and your loved ones copies today. I'm very honored to be able to present this material to you. I know it's going to help you. Let's talk about the role of mediation, particularly for faith-based divorces. Where do you see the role of mediation for people of faith when it comes to a divorce?
It shouldn't even be a thought not to go there. Now, I'm someone that I started practicing law when if you ask somebody what is mediation, they would have no idea what you were talking about. There was no such thing. I can actually remember the day, Kelly, when at a grand gathering of family law specialists in Dallas, there was discussion about this thing called mediation that was coming up, and the idea was that this would be horrific for the project. Texas, we have the right to a jury trial for many, many things that you can't try to a jury in other states. It's expensive, by the way, typically. So that's why it doesn't happen more often. But any kind of factual question can go to the jury. So the trial lawyers, when mediation was first coming into the scene, it was like, this is terrible. Now, what's happened over time, the courts have embraced it because it helps them move their docket. That's not the good reason for mediation. Mediation, especially in the arena of family law, is the way to go. It's an opportunity to take your dirty laundry and not air it out for the world. I mean, there's scripture on that, right? It's dealing with a fellow Christ follower in a civilized manner. And here's the thing, Kelly, you know this, and a lot of the people listening know this. Our court system is based on an adversarial model. The idea is that you go down to the courthouse and you try things in the fire, so to speak, right? You cross-examine. The idea is that person's probably gonna stretch the truth. I'll say in the Dallas courthouse, the old red courthouse, there was more lying that went on that square block than maybe any place else in the city. And that was people under oath, under the penalties of perjury. It's a nasty place, but you got to go there from time to time. Divorce is tough enough, right? But if the process is destructive, then just, it's exponentially worse. And the best thing that two believers can do is find somebody like, and Kelly, I'm going to plug you here, like a Kelly Bennett. That's who I want to help get the couple and the family through a divorce. Number one, you're a legal expert. I want a legal expert as my mediator. With all due respect, there are some fine mediators out there that are not lawyers. There are some fine mediators out there that are lawyers who practice maybe general civil litigation, but they don't know that much about family law. No, I want a family law experienced lawyer. I want a family lawyer that knows how to go into the courtroom, quite frankly, who has in the past gone in the courtroom and been very effective, that understands what that looks like. Now I'm going to walk you through a process that's so much better, and you're going to have an understanding of what the rules are, what the law is. Now, it's your job as a mediator to facilitate settlement, right? You're not a judge.
You have to remember in mediation, I can give legal advice, but I can give information. So what does that
Right.
look like, right? And people are, well, why go to mediation if you can't give me legal advice? Well, what that looks like is I can, because of exactly what you said, but it's called reality testing. Look, I've been litigating for 35 years. I sit on the bench as a temporary judge from time to time. And the reason I'm not tooting my own horn, but what I'm telling you is I know what's going to happen if we can't agree on this issue
Right.
over here or all these issues. Let me tell you what I've seen happen time and time again, and I will give you a nice prediction of what's going to happen because I have that experience, right? And that's what's so important about someone who's been in the courthouse. That's reality testing.
No, and and there are settings where there are attorneys involved, and there are no attorneys involved, and I think that depends upon the case. I lean towards liking to have the attorney with each party, so each party's in there with an attorney, and they have a mediator. But here's the reality: some lawyers they want to push it to a fight.
Yeah.
Some lawyers have no idea what's going on, unfortunately. So that highly experienced mediator can really help. Now, Kelly, you know this, in mediation, it takes two parties to settle the case, two parties to reach an agreement. And sometimes there's one side that is just obstinate. They're just not going there. But you got to try. Most cases settle in mediation has been my experience, Kelly. Maybe you've had a different experience. Would you agree that most do settle in mediation?
They do. And I'm going to speak to our neck of the woods. We have at the present time 18 bench officers countywide, all the way from Palm Springs out here to we call where we are in Temecula, North San Diego County. But we're really Riverside County, all the way out here, all the way up into the deep inland empire. 18 family law bench officers out of all of our judges. There are at any given time 2,600 cases ready for trial. That's not counting how many are on each judge's docket. Each judge is around 1,300, sometimes upwards of 1,500 cases, pending cases on their family law dockets at any given time. Okay. So you get the picture that it takes a long time to get to trial here. Most people are so anxious to avoid that mess and the expense. And the dirty little secret is the longer your case goes, the cost exponentially goes. I'm sure that's not anything different in Texas, right? So the faster we can get to yes and get a settlement, the better off the family's estate is. The children are, get into a groove of a set schedule. We get everything divided, all of that. So those are the practical things. We typically will settle a divorce case when we start it from start to finish, and we'll handle it from the filing to the final divorce. Nobody ever walks into a courthouse. They don't even know what a courthouse looks like when we mediate these cases from beginning to end. And if they're cooperative and do what they're supposed to do, 60 to 90 days from start, we're done. Versus an average of 18 to 24 months to get heard and get a trial. And we're not talking the complex cases. That's the average time to get in front of a judge and get a trial, right? And so in those 18 to 24 months, you're going to average on, let's say we've got a basic case, a house, 2 dogs, 2 kids, 2 cars, a 401k, maybe a government pension over here. And that's about it. Credit card debt and some loans. Each side, if they don't cooperate, are going to spend a minimum of 50 grand a piece, if not 100 to 150 a piece. Now our kids don't get to go to college. Now you're not going on a vacation for a very long time. At any rate, that's a long answer to your question. Do most of your cases settle? When people understand the playing field out there, they're motivated to go, I don't want to do that. And quite frankly, as lawyers, we shouldn't be taking the college fund. Let me talk to my faith-based friends out there. If you're going through a divorce, absent domestic violence going on, okay? When you go through mediation, it allows you and your spouse to decide what happens. When we go over here the traditional court route because we're mad and we want to have our day in court and mete out a little justice, right? Maybe there's been an affair, whatever, right? Because that's a common response to that is anger. You're going to let the man or woman in the black dress decide. Now, When we see divorced couples and they've got minor children and somebody comes along and injures that child, mom and dad typically, regardless of their differences, come together and say, "Oh no, you're not going to mess with my kid. The child needs medical treatment, whatever," right? The parents are going to come together and say, "We're deciding together what's going to happen next for our child." Well, if you think about it, when you don't go through mediation, which is really what it allows you to do, come together and decide what's going to happen for our children's future, what's going to happen for our future as a unit that is now going to be a divided unit. When you don't do that, it's like going to the court and saying to the person on the bench, "Could you please decide what's going to happen to our children? Because we're not capable of doing it. So you decide."
To your point, when you think about the two big tests that you deal with in a family law case, one, in dividing the property, in Texas, the standard is what's a just and right division. And the child-related issues, it's what's in the best interest of the child. Well, do you see how gray those two areas and how broad those two areas are? What very subjective. Now we have some guidelines, but they're guidelines. At the end of the day, that person, your judge, has huge discretion as to what they find to be a just and right division, what they find to be in the best interest of the child.
Yeah. I
Yeah.
think the other thing is on the faith-based piece, if you're people of faith, going to a faith-based mediator who is skilled and can handle themselves in the regular world, but has a deep understanding of where you're coming from and your faith culture makes all the difference in the world. Because in the mediation arena, if you want to agree that we'll have the children in church every Sunday or Saturday, whether they're with mom or dad, you're going to get that. You can come to that agreement and turn that into a court order. You go to the court and ask about that. They don't have a law behind them to do that. And they also, they got to move you on and just deal with the nuts and bolts. I'm just using that as an example. Denny, tell me really quickly as we close it out about your book.
Well, the title is Back to Court, and the reality is that if you've gone through, especially if you've gone through a contentious custody case, you're probably looking at another round unless you can work with the other side and avoid it. And the book really is designed, Kelly, to one, give a broad education, if you will, on what to expect in a contested custody case, whether it's an initial custody case or you're looking at going back. And we talk a lot about mediation, faith-based mediation, talk about arbitration, faith-based arbitration. Frankly, the book is designed to encourage you to look to those alternatives to going back to court, but it's also designed to prepare you and educate you if you find yourself going there. Because again, it only takes one party to bring you back into court.
That's right. Very valuable resource. And I'll put the link in the show notes. You guys should take a look at that. It's on Amazon and get it immediately. As we're talking to the person of faith that is feeling horribly challenged in their faith life because they are going through or about to start down the road of divorce, what are your final comments and words of encouragement for them?
Kelly, I've had more than several people tell me, I almost feel guilty turning to God now when I'm, going through this, and maybe they haven't been looking to God in their lives enough. And now they're going through this crisis and they're like, gosh, isn't this a lousy time to now try to look to God to help me? No, there's not a better time. You want to embrace God, embrace his word, stay in prayer. We mentioned being with the right they. And revolve your life around the church. There's no better time to do it than when you're going through the crisis like this. And for those who've never been through a divorce, they don't know. For those who've never been through a child custody contest, they have no idea. It's very, very difficult, very trying. So you want to have the right people around you. Go out and get yourself a really good lawyer. Really push towards mediation. Kelly, you're someone that knows how to do both extremely well. And that's who you want in your corner. And then revolve your life around your faith.
I couldn't agree more. And I think what I'd love the listener to hear in all of this is very easy to look at the churches and saying, you're not helping me, you're not supporting me, I'm walking away. But the amount of grace and mercy that we are seeking and forgiveness of ourselves, I would hope that you could also put that into, if you've had some misguided folks at church that maybe have done a real damage because they didn't know, or you felt judged, extend the grace and mercy to them. And look at it this way. There's a distinction between God's children and God. You got the crowd over here that we call the Trinity. Then you got the crowd over here that's the human crowd, God's children. And these guys are going to make mistakes every time. Welcome to the human race. I think I want to close with a little what some people might hear as poetry. We recognize where it comes from, but you know it. And so to encourage you, friends, the promise is that those that wait on the Lord, they'll renew their strength. They'll mount up with wings as eagles. They'll run and not be weary. They're going to walk and not faint. And ask God to teach you to wait and be patient. All right. Can I get you, do you have just one more second? I know I'm running over. One more second. You mentioned at the beginning about how your dad was kind of a legend, and I just love that I got to meet him. Will you tell the story about just one little story about his Jack Ruby experience?
Yeah, it's kind of crazy. We have Dennis Brewer, Senior, BC, and AD. So BC was before Christ, before he became a Christian, and AD is after. So I was 18, 19 when he gave his life to the Lord, and it was a very dramatic life change. But during the BC era, he had a very active practice. He was old school. He would do a little bit of everything: criminal, civil, divorce, and along the way, he represented Jack Ruby on some matters. And what's kind of crazy is that we learned that along the way, at some point, Lee Harvey Oswald, who lived in Irving, which is where we had our practice, the firm had handled a traffic ticket for him.
Oh, I didn't know that part.
I would love to be able to find the traffic ticket record, but I don't think I'll be able to do that. So we had is it the honor or the dishonor of having both of them as clients at one point in time. Now, this was before I was practicing law, but Jack Ruby had a nightclub in Dallas, and so my dad would frequent that club from time to time. That's, I think, how he met, and so I had actually had a discussion with Jack Ruby about representing Ruby after he shot and killed Oswald. And at the time, Senior was he was both the city attorney for Irving and the school board attorney for Irving, and he weighed the pros and cons and decided, well, you know what, there's no way I could represent Jack Ruby and keep my job as city attorney and school board attorney here in Irving. Gosh, I probably shouldn't mention, I'm reading a book right now that goes into that. There was a lady that was she was on the show What's My Line, and she was an investigative reporter as well, and she was doing a research into the death of Jack Ruby and his involvement and Oswald's involvement. So it was kind of strange. I've just been reading up on that. She died somewhat mysteriously, so there's still a lot of speculation about that.
All right, Mr. Brewer. Well, this has really been wonderful. Thank you so much for joining me today.
My pleasure. Really enjoyed it.
Hey, friends, if you're enjoying the content, do me a favor. If you're listening on YouTube, go ahead and hit the subscribe and the like button. Same thing if you're just listening to it as an audio podcast on your podcast provider. When you follow, like, and subscribe, it helps us get this vital information out to lots of other people just like you who are grappling with conflict and family issues. And, we really want to help you and others because at the end of the day, it helps families. If you'd like to get early bird advance info on when new episodes and products are dropping, go ahead and head on over to the show notes wherever you're listening or watching, and you'll find a link there that says, sign me up for the insider email list. Thanks again for listening. It means the world to us.